As the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, casting harsh shadows across the dusty streets of Silver Creek, the thunderous roar of customized Harley-Davidsons shattered the morning peace. 6 menacing bikers, their chrome-plated machines gleaming, like predatory teeth, circled the weathered brick building of Mason's pawnshop, like vultures sizing up their prey. They moved with practiced precision, their leather cuts marked with the blood-red insignia of the Steel Serpents, a notorious gang known for their calculated heists across 3 states. The pawnshop stood as a testament to time, its faded green, awning and gold-lettered windows speaking of decades of quiet business in this small mining town. Inside, Thomas Mason, a lean man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses, methodically arranged a display of vintage watches. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, his weathered hands moving with the precision of someone who'd spent years mastering the art of patience. To anyone passing by, he was just another small-town business owner, counting the hours until closing time. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, catching on the eclectic collection of merchandise that filled the shop. Civil War memorabilia shared space with modern electronics, vintage guitars hung above glass cases filled with jewelry, and in the corner, a collection of antique firearms spoke to Mason's appreciation for historical weapons. The air carried the distinct scent of aged wood, metal polish, and leather, a combination that had become as familiar to Mason as his own reflection. Outside, the bikers had finished their initial surveillance. Their leader, a towering figure known as Razor Mike Kendrick, dismounted his custom street glide, his heavy boots sending small clouds of dust into the air. His face, marked by a long scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, twisted into a predatory smile as he assessed the building's layout. The Steel Serpents weren't your typical motorcycle gang. They were professionals, ex-military turned outlaws, who picked their targets with surgical precision. The rest of the crew spread out with practiced efficiency. Shadow Sarah Chen, their tech specialist, moved toward the back alley, her dark eyes scanning for security cameras. The twins, Jack and Jake Thunder Thompson, positioned themselves near the shop's entrance, their identical faces marked by the same cold calculation. Ghost, Greg Martinez, their demolitions expert, hung back, checking his phone for police scanner updates, while Cypher Charlie Wilson, the safe cracker, adjusted his leather gloves with meticulous care. What the Steel Serpents couldn't know, was that Thomas Mason was far more than the mild-mannered pawnbroker he appeared to be. Behind those wire-rimmed glasses lay eyes that had witnessed operations in every major conflict zone of the past 3 decades. His careful movements weren't just those of a detail-oriented shopkeeper. They were the ingrained habits of a man who'd spent 20 years in the CIA's Special Activities Division, running some of the agency's most sensitive operations across the globe. The morning silence was broken only by the low rumble of idling motorcycles and the distant sound of a freight train passing through the outskirts of town. Mason continued his work, appearing oblivious to the brewing storm outside. But his trained senses had already catalogued every detail of the situation. He'd noticed the way the gang had cased his shop, recognized their military-style formation, and identified the subtle bulges under their leather jackets that spoke of concealed weapons. Through the security camera feed discreetly displayed on his ancient computer monitor, Mason watched as Razor Mike made his way toward the shop's entrance. The bell above the door would ring in exactly 17 seconds, and with it would come a confrontation that would shatter the peaceful facade of Silver Creek forever. Mason's fingers brushed against the antique desk drawer where he kept his Sig Sauer P226, a habit born from years of living on the edge of danger. The morning light caught on the collection of military challenge coins displayed in a small case near the register, a careful selection that hinted at his past without revealing too much. Among them was a particular coin that only a handful of people would recognize, marking him as a member of an elite CIA unit that officially never existed. It was a subtle detail, one that would mean nothing to most, but everything to those who knew what to look for. As the first heavy bootsteps approached the door, Mason allowed himself a small smile. The Steel Serpents had chosen his shop believing they'd found an easy mark, a quiet pawnbroker in a sleepy Montana town. They were about to learn a costly lesson about the danger of underestimating their targets. The bell above the door chimed, a deceptively cheerful sound that marked the beginning of what would become a legendary story in Silver Creek's history. A tale of how 6 professional thieves picked the wrong pawn shop on the wrong morning in the wrong town. The air in the shop grew heavy with tension as the first biker crossed the threshold, the scent of leather and motorcycle exhaust mixing with the shop's usual musty atmosphere. Mason adjusted his glasses, his movements unhurried and deliberate, maintaining the carefully crafted image of an ordinary shopkeeper unaware of the storm about to break. The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that don't bare their teeth until it's too late. Thomas Mason moved with practiced efficiency. Behind the glass counter of his pawn shop, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the gleam of vintage pocket watches laid out before him. At first glance, he cut an unassuming figure: khaki slacks, a faded blue button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and hands that showed years of handling delicate mechanisms. His silver-streaked dark hair was neatly combed, and the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent examining fine details under poor light. The shop itself was a testament to organized chaos, a carefully curated collection of stories waiting to be told. Each item had been meticulously placed to appear random, while following a system only Mason fully understood. Military memorabilia occupied the western wall, not because it sold well, but because it gave him the clearest line of sight to the door. The glass cases were arranged in a pattern that created natural choke points, a detail most would dismiss as poor interior design. Mason's movements to the untrained eye seemed like those of any other small-town shopkeeper. The way he wiped down the glass cases with slow, circular motions, how he adjusted the angle of each display item with careful precision, how he maintained a casual awareness of his surroundings while appearing absorbed in his work. These were habits cultivated over decades of living in the shadows, where survival depended on appearing ordinary. His history was written in the subtle details, the way he never fully turned his back to the door, how his fingers occasionally brushed against the underside of the counter where a panic button was, concealed the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders that betrayed a constant state of readiness. These were the marks of a man who had spent 20 years in the world's most dangerous places, gathering intelligence and executing operations that would never appear in any official record. The CIA's Special Activities Division had taught Mason many things, but perhaps the most valuable was the art of invisibility in plain sight. He'd learned to blend into any environment, to become the person others expected to see. In Baghdad, he'd been a street vendor selling dates and figs while coordinating complex extraction operations. In Moscow, he'd posed as a maintenance worker while tracking nuclear material. Now in Silver Creek, Montana, he was just another small business owner trying to make ends meet in a dying town. His pawn shop served multiple purposes. It provided excellent cover for his retirement, allowing him to maintain connections with his past life through the various items that passed through his hands. More importantly, it gave him a reason to stay in one place, something he'd never managed during his active years. The shop had become his sanctuary, a place where he could put his skills to use in quieter ways, helping people who needed quick cash while keeping an eye on the ebb and flow of small-town life. Mason's daily routine was simple and predictable. He opened the shop at 8 sharp, spent the morning cataloguing new acquisitions and updating his meticulous records, and took lunch at his desk while monitoring the police scanner he kept hidden. Beneath a stack of old newspapers, the afternoons were devoted to repairs, watches, jewelry, and small electronics, work that required the same steady hands and attention to detail that had once disarmed bombs and assembled surveillance. Equipment in foreign hotel rooms, the locals knew him as a fair businessman with a knack for fixing things. They brought him their broken watches, their grandmother's jewelry in need of repair, their family heirlooms requiring restoration. He'd earned a reputation for honesty and discretion, qualities that made him popular with both the townspeople and the occasional drifter passing through. Few suspected that the quiet pawnbroker could read lips in 6 languages or kill a man in twice as many ways. His past had left its marks, though. The slight limp in his right leg from a midnight extraction gone wrong in Yemen. The barely visible scar along his hairline from a close call in Bogotá. The way he sometimes woke in the middle of the night, reaching for a weapon that was no longer under his pillow. These were the souvenirs of a life spent in the shadows, reminders of the man he used to be. Today, his carefully constructed routine was about to be disrupted. As he watched the Steel Serpents through his security feeds, Mason felt a familiar tension building in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had before countless operations, a combination of focus and controlled adrenaline that sharpened his senses and slowed time to a crawl. His mind automatically began processing variables: 6 targets, military-trained, likely armed, civilian dense area, multiple entry points. The old instincts were surfacing now, pushing aside the facade of the simple shopkeeper. His breathing slowed automatically, his pupils dilated slightly, and his muscles prepared for potential action. These physical responses were as natural to him as breathing. Conditioning burned into his nervous system through years of high-stakes operations. Mason's eyes flickered to the vintage Coca-Cola clock on the wall. 10:17 a.m. The morning rush at the diner across the street would be dying down. The bank 2 doors down would be relatively quiet. Sheriff Cooper would be making his rounds on the other side of town. All these details filtered through his mind, pieces of a tactical puzzle he'd been unconsciously assembling since he first opened the shop 5 years ago. As he waited for the inevitable confrontation, Mason allowed himself a moment to appreciate the irony of his situation. He'd spent years hunting down threats to national security, only to find them walking through his front door in a small Montana town. The quiet life he'd built here might soon be compromised, but as he felt the familiar weight of his Sig Sauer against his lower back, he knew that some habits died harder than others. Razor. Mike Kendrick strode into Mason's pawn shop like he owned the place, his leather boots leaving dusty prints on the recently swept floor. Standing at 6'4" with shoulders like a linebacker, his presence filled the small shop, casting long shadows across the display cases. The scar on his face pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer, a souvenir from his dishonorable discharge from the Army Rangers after a botched operation in Afghanistan. Behind him, the rest of the Steel Serpents, filed in with practiced precision. Shadow. Sarah Chen moved like a cat, her dark eyes scanning the security camera positions while appearing to browse the jewelry cases. Her fingers, adorned with silver rings, tapped a quiet rhythm on the glass. 3 short, 2 long, a silent code to the others that she'd identified the surveillance system's blind spots. The Thompson twins, Jack and Jake, positioned themselves near the entrance, their matching leather cuts bearing patches that read Thunder 1 and Thunder 2. Their synchronized movements spoke of years spent working in tandem, first as Army EOD technicians, then as professional thieves. They were the muscle of the group, though their lean builds often led others to underestimate their strength. Ghost. Greg Martinez lingered near a display of vintage radios. his weathered face betraying no emotion as he monitored the police scanner frequency through a concealed earpiece. His fingers drummed absently on the handle of the K-bar knife, strapped to his thigh, hidden beneath his leather jacket. The former Force Recon Marine had a talent for making problems, and people disappear without a trace. Cipher. Charlie Wilson, the newest member of their crew, busied himself examining the antique lock collection near the counter. His eyes, sharp behind thick-framed glasses, were already analyzing the shop's security measures. Before being dishonorably discharged from the Air Force's Cybersecurity Division, he'd been one of the military's top code breakers. The Steel Serpents weren't your average motorcycle gang. They operated with military precision, choosing targets based on detailed intelligence and weeks of surveillance. Their heists were carefully choreographed operations that usually went off without a hitch. In the past 3 years, they'd hit 12 similar establishments across 3 states, leaving no evidence and no witnesses. "Nice place you got here, old-timer." Razor's voice rumbled through the shop as he approached the counter. He towered over Mason, using his height to cast an intimidating shadow. "Must be doing pretty well for yourself in a town like this." His casual tone carried an undercurrent of threat, a predator playing with its prey. Sarah drifted toward the military memorabilia, her trained eye catching details the others might miss. "Interesting collection," she murmured, fingers trailing over a display of service medals. "Some rare pieces here." Her voice carried a hint of her Hong Kong heritage, smoothed by years in American special operations. The Thompson twins had already taken up positions that gave them clear lines of sight to both the front and back entrances. They moved with the coordinated grace of men who'd spent years watching each other's backs in combat zones. Their matching face tattoos, serpents coiling around their right eyes, seemed to writhe in the fluorescent lighting. Ghost maintained his position near the radios, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly moving. He'd spotted 3 potential escape routes, 2 surveillance cameras, and what looked like a panic button under the counter. His mind was already mapping out contingency plans, calculating angles and timing for a quick exit if needed. Cipher had made his way to the vintage computer display, though his attention was really on the shop's modern security system. His fingers itched to get at the control panel he'd spotted behind the counter. Military-grade encryption couldn't keep him out. A small-town pawnshop security would be child's play. Razor leaned on the glass counter, his massive arms spread wide in a gesture that was both casual and threatening. "Word around town is you've got quite a collection in that safe of yours," he said, nodding toward the back room. "High-end pieces, valuable collectibles, must be worth a pretty penny." The gang had done their homework. 3 weeks of surveillance had revealed a pattern of wealthy collectors visiting the shop after hours, leaving with small packages and very satisfied expressions. Whatever Mason was dealing in, it was worth more than the usual pawned guitars. "And family jewelry. We're thinking of starting a collection ourselves," Razor continued, his scarred face splitting into a predatory grin. "Might need some expert advice on what's worth investing in." The threat in his words was clear as mountain air. The Thompson twins shifted slightly, their hands moving closer to their concealed weapons. Sarah had completed her circuit of the shop, exchanging subtle nods with Ghost and Cipher. The trap was set, the players in position. They'd done this dance before, and it always ended the same way. What they didn't realize was that their carefully planned operation was about to run headlong into decades of CIA training and experience. They saw an aging pawnbroker, alone and vulnerable. They didn't see the way Mason's eyes tracked their movements with professional assessment, how he'd already noted their weapons, their positions, their patterns of communication. The air in the shop grew thick with tension as Razor's crew moved into their final positions. The morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows, creating a theatrical backdrop for the drama about to unfold. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the quiet streets of Silver Creek, marking the moment when everything was about to change. Mason's response to Razor's thinly veiled threat was measured and deliberate, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd faced down far worse situations. "Always happy to offer advice to interested collectors," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with careful precision. "Though most prefer to browse during regular business hours." His eyes met Razor's, holding the gaze a fraction longer than a typical shopkeeper would dare. The initial tension crackled through the shop like static electricity before a storm. Sarah Chen's fingers traced patterns on a display case containing Civil War memorabilia, her movement catching Mason's attention. He noticed the way she favored her left side, an old injury, possibly from her service days. These small details filed themselves away in his mental dossier, habits from years of fieldwork that never quite faded. "Regular business hours?" Razor's laugh echoed off the walls. "Deep and threatening?" "Way I see it, old man, business hours are whenever we say they are." He drummed his fingers on the glass counter, the sound sharp and deliberate. "And right now, we're very interested in doing some specialized shopping." The Thompson twins moved in perfect sync, one sliding the deadbolt on the front door, while the other flipped the open sign to closed. The click of the lock echoed through the shop like a gunshot. Ghost maintained his position by the radios, his hand now resting more obviously on his concealed weapon. Mason continued polishing a pocket watch, his movements unhurried. "Specialized shopping?" he asked, his voice carrying just the right note of nervous confusion. "I'm afraid I don't quite understand." His hands trembled slightly, a masterful touch that any trained observer would read as fear rather than the controlled anticipation it really was. Cypher stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with a smirk. "Let's cut the act, old-timer. We know about your after-hours trade, the high-end pieces that never make it to your display cases, the collectors who come in through the back door." His voice carried the arrogant confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. Sarah moved closer to the counter, her hips swaying with practiced grace. "It would be a shame if the local authorities learned about your special inventory," she purred, her accent becoming more pronounced. "Tax implications alone could be quite troublesome." Her dark eyes glittered with malice, watching for signs of weakness. Mason's shoulders slumped slightly, his posture shifting to project vulnerability. "I run a legitimate business here," he protested, his voice wavering. "Everything is properly documented and registered." He reached for a ledger beneath the counter, his movements deliberately slow and telegraphed. "Save it," Razor growled, slapping his hand on the counter. The sound made the nearby display cases rattle. "We're not here for paperwork. We know you've got high-value merchandise in that safe of yours, the kind of stuff that never makes it into the books." The Thompson twins had moved to flank the counter, their matching faces set in identical expressions of anticipation. One cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the tense atmosphere. "Boss says you've got some nice pieces," the one called Thunder One said. "Be a shame if anything happened to them, or you." Ghost stepped away from the radios, his movement bringing him closer to the back room. "Police scanners quiet," he reported, his voice low and professional. "Sheriff's on the other side of town. No patrols scheduled for another hour." Mason's hand trembled as he pushed his glasses up his nose, a gesture that helped conceal his quick assessment of the situation. 6 hostiles, all armed, all with military training. The twins by the door would be the first problem, followed by Sarah's likely concealed blade. Ghost's position near the back room needed to be addressed before he could access any of Mason's hidden equipment. "Look," Mason said, his voice cracking slightly, "I'm just a simple businessman. I don't want any trouble." He raised his hands in a placating gesture, the movement allowing him to shift his weight onto his back foot, a subtle preparation for what might come next. Razor leaned across the counter, his scarred face inches from Mason's. "Trouble found you anyway, old man. Now why don't you show us what's in that safe of yours? Make this easy on yourself." His breath smelled of cigarettes and coffee, his eyes cold and predatory. The morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows, creating strips of light and dark across the shop floor. A car passed outside, its engine sound muffled by the thick windows. In the distance, the train whistle sounded again, closer now, its mournful tone a countdown to the inevitable. Mason's fingers brushed against the underside of the counter, feeling the familiar texture of the panic button he'd never needed to use. His mind calculated angles, distances, potential weapons within reach, the weighted paperweight on his desk, the letter opener in the drawer, the can of military-grade pepper, spray disguised as furniture polish on the shelf behind him. "Perhaps we could discuss this," he offered, his voice carrying just the right amount of fearful compliance. "I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement." His eyes darted between the gang members, playing the part of a frightened shopkeeper, while calculating the optimal order of engagement if things went south. The tension in the room continued to build, like a pressure cooker slowly approaching its limit. Every movement, every word, every breath seemed to carry extra weight, as the situation teetered on the edge of violence. What the Steel Serpents saw as their moment of triumph was rapidly approaching a turning point they couldn't possibly anticipate. The situation escalated as Cypher moved toward the security panel near the counter, his fingers already reaching for the keypad. "Let's make this interesting," he smirked, pulling a small electronic device from his pocket. "Want to bet how long it takes me to crack your system? I give it 2 minutes tops." Mason watched the movement with carefully concealed interest, noting how Ghost shifted his position to cover Cypher's work. The gang's coordination spoke of extensive practice. They'd done this before, probably many times. Razor maintained his intimidating posture at the counter, while Sarah drifted closer to the vintage weapon display, her eyes lingering too long on a particular Civil War-era revolver. "The security system is quite basic," Mason offered, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "Just a simple commercial setup." Another calculated revelation, feeding their confidence while concealing the military-grade additions he'd installed beneath the standard equipment. Their overconfidence was building exactly as he'd seen countless times before in operations across 3 continents. Thunder One moved closer to the backroom door, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Boss, want me to start checking out the storage area?" His twin maintained position near the front, their instinctive coordination revealing their professional military background. The way they moved, the implicit communication between them. "Army," Mason assessed. "Probably special. Forces before whatever incident led them to this life." "Not yet," Razor commanded, his attention still focused on Mason. "Our friend here is going to give us the grand tour himself, aren't you?" His scarred face twisted into what might have been meant as a reassuring smile, but came across as a predatory grin. "No need to make this complicated." Sarah had completed her circuit of the shop, pausing near a display of military medals. "These are interesting," she observed, her finger tracing the edge of a particular case. "Some rare pieces here, very rare." Her eyes met Mason's, a flicker of professional assessment in them. "Almost too rare for a small-town pawnshop." Mason's hands shook as he adjusted a stack of papers on the counter, the movement allowing him to shift closer to the concealed panic button. "I have all the proper documentation," he stammered, playing up the nervous shopkeeper act. "Everything is legitimate, I assure you." Ghost's radio crackled softly, a police band transmission that made him tilt his head slightly. "All clear," he reported after a moment. "Sheriff still occupied with that fender bender on the highway?" His hand never left his concealed weapon, his stance revealing his combat training. Marine Force Recon, Mason guessed, noting the particular way he positioned himself for maximum situational awareness. Cypher let out a quiet laugh from the security panel. "This is even easier than I thought," he announced, fingers dancing over his device. "Standard commercial encryption, probably hasn't been updated in years." He was wrong, of course. The visible system was just a facade, hiding the real security measures beneath. The tension in the shop continued to build as Razor leaned further over the counter, his massive frame casting a shadow over Mason. "Here's how this is going to work," he growled, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're going to open that safe, show us your special collection, and we're going to make some withdrawals. Play nice, and you might even get to keep your shop and all your fingers." Thunder 2 shifted his weight by the front door, his movement catching Mason's attention. The way he favored his right leg suggested an old injury, possibly from the same incident that led to their discharge. These small details continued to accumulate in Mason's mind, building a tactical picture of his opponents. "Please," Mason pleaded, his voice cracking, "I have a family to support." The lie came easily, part of the cover story he'd maintained for years. Each word, each gesture was calculated to reinforce their perception of him as a harmless, frightened civilian. Even as he continued to assess and plan, Sarah moved closer to the counter, her hip brushing against a display case. "Family man, are you?" she asked, her tone mockingly sweet. "Then you understand why it's important to make smart choices. For their sake." The threat in her words was clear, though she couldn't know she was threatening a family that didn't exist. Mason's hand trembled as he reached for his glasses, using the movement to mask another quick survey of the room. The morning sun had shifted, changing the pattern of shadows across the floor. The train was closer now, its vibrations just barely detectable through the floor. All these details fed into his tactical assessment, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The situation was approaching a critical point. Soon, the Steel Serpents would demand access to the safe, and Mason would have to decide how this played out. The weight of his concealed Sig Sauer pressed against his lower back, a familiar comfort, while his mind calculated angles, distances, and potential scenarios. The professional in him noted with detached interest how this situation paralleled countless others he'd faced in his former life. The same dance of predator and prey, though the roles weren't quite what they appeared to be. Behind the unassuming facade of Thomas Mason lay a history written in classified files and redacted mission reports. 20 years in the CIA's Special Activities Division had taken him from the mountains of Afghanistan to the back alleys of Moscow, from high-stakes operations in Beijing to delicate extractions in Tehran. Each mission, each cover identity, had added layers to his ability to become whoever he needed to be at any given moment. His journey had begun in the halls of Langley, where his exceptional aptitude for languages and psychological warfare had caught the attention of his superiors. Fresh out of the Army's intelligence corps, Mason had shown a natural talent for becoming invisible in plain sight. He could transform himself from a street vendor in Baghdad to a maintenance worker in St. Petersburg, with such conviction that even fellow operatives sometimes failed to recognize him. The scar along his hairline, now hidden beneath silver-streaked hair, came from a midnight extraction in Iran that had gone sideways. A source with critical nuclear intelligence had needed to be relocated, but someone had compromised the operation. Mason had fought his way out through 3 security checkpoints, carrying the wounded asset over his shoulder while maintaining his cover as a local schoolteacher until the very end. The slight favor he showed to his right leg stemmed from a mission in Venezuela, where he'd spent 6 months posing as a dock worker while tracking a shipment of biological weapons. The operation had culminated in a firefight amid shipping containers, leaving him with a bullet in his thigh and another successful mission in his classified record. The doctors had wanted him to take a desk job after that, but Mason had been back in the field within 2 months. His expertise in antiquities and valuable collectibles wasn't just a cover story. Years of operations had required him to become genuinely knowledgeable about various subjects, and he'd developed a particular interest in historical artifacts. This knowledge had served him well during operations involving art theft and artifact smuggling, allowing him to move seamlessly through the world of high-end collectors and dealers. The pawnshop itself was more than just a retirement business. It served as a perfect cover for maintaining certain connections from his past life, allowing him to keep an eye on patterns and movements that might interest his former employers. The occasional midnight visitor wasn't always there to pawn family jewelry. Sometimes they carried information instead of valuables. Mason's hands, now busy organizing papers on the counter, had once dismantled bombs in Kabul and assembled surveillance equipment in luxury hotel rooms across Europe. The same fingers that now sized rings and repaired watches had coded messages in 7 different languages and handled some of the agency's most sensitive documents. Every skill he'd learned, every technique he'd mastered, had been retained and repurposed for his new life. The loss of his partner in Budapest still haunted him. David Chen had been more than just another operative. He'd been the closest thing to a brother Mason had ever known. Their last operation together had been meant to be routine, observe and report on a meeting between arms dealers. Instead, it had turned into a bloodbath when a third party had decided to eliminate all witnesses. Mason had made it out. David hadn't. The incident had led to one of Mason's few unauthorized operations, a 3-month hunt that had ended with justice served in a way that would never appear in any official record. His retirement to Silver Creek hadn't been entirely his choice. After the Budapest incident and its aftermath, his superiors had suggested he take some time away from active operations. The pawnshop had started as a cover story, a way to maintain a presence in a strategic location while things cooled down. Over time, it had become something more, a genuine fresh start, albeit one that didn't require him to completely abandon his old skills. The CIA had taught Mason to read people, to spot the tells and triggers that could make or break an operation. Looking at the Steel Serpents now, he saw more than just common criminals. Their military background was obvious in their movement patterns and communication style, but there was something else. A desperation that made them more dangerous than typical thieves. His training had included extensive psychological profiling, and he recognized the signs of men and women who had lost their way after leaving military service. He'd seen it before, skilled operators who couldn't adjust to civilian life, who missed the adrenaline and purpose of active duty. In another life, he might have recruited them, redirected their talents toward more legitimate purposes. The weight of his Sig Sauer against his back was a reminder that some habits couldn't be unlearned. The weapon was just one of several carefully concealed throughout the shop. His former handlers would have approved of his preparation, of how he'd turned the pawnshop into a defensible position without any obvious signs of fortification. Mason's past had taught him that survival often depended on being underestimated. He'd played many roles over the years: teacher, mechanic, businessman, tourist, each one carefully crafted to avoid drawing attention. Now, as he faced down the Steel Serpents, he was playing perhaps his most important role yet, that of a simple pawnbroker who was about to teach some overconfident thieves a valuable lesson about appearances. The confrontation reached its boiling point as Razor slammed his fist on the glass counter, causing the displays inside to rattle. "Enough stalling," he growled, his scarred face twisted with impatience. "Open the safe, now!" The morning sun caught the edge of a blade that had appeared in his hand, its polished surface gleaming with deadly promise. Mason raised his hands. In apparent surrender, his shoulders slumped in defeat. All right, he stammered, his voice trembling. "Just, please don't hurt me." He moved slowly toward the back room, carefully telegraphing each movement. Thunder One followed close, behind, while his twin maintained position at the front door. "Smart choice, old man," Sarah purred, her fingers trailing along the display cases as she moved to follow. Her other hand rested casually near her hip, where Mason had already noted the outline of a concealed weapon. The confidence in her stride told him she'd done this many times before. Ghost's radio crackled again. "Still clear," he reported, his voice low and professional. "But we should wrap this up quick." He moved to cover the back entrance, his movements betraying his force recon training. Mason noted how he positioned himself to maintain line of sight with both doors. Cypher continued working on the security system, his device now connected to the main panel. "Almost got it," he announced, fingers dancing across the keypad. "Just another minute to disable the—" "Wait." His confident smile faltered. "This isn't right. The encryption just changed." Mason had reached the backroom door, his hand resting on the handle. "It's an old system," he offered apologetically. "Sometimes it acts up." His other hand drifted toward his lower back, movements masked by his position. The weight of the Sig Sauer was reassuring against his spine. Razor grabbed Mason's shoulder, spinning him around roughly. "No more games," he snarled, bringing the knife up to Mason's throat. "Open it now." The blade pressed against Mason's skin, just hard enough to make its presence felt without drawing blood. Time seemed to slow as Mason's training took over. He noted every detail with crystal clarity, the slight tremor in Razor's knife hand, suggesting adrenaline rather than experience. The way Sarah had shifted her weight, preparing to move. The Thompson twins' synchronized reach for their weapons. Ghost's position by the back door, slightly too far to respond quickly. "Okay," Mason said softly, his voice changing subtly. Gone was the fearful shopkeeper, replaced by something colder, more controlled. "But you should know something." His glasses caught the light, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "You really should have done better research." The change in his demeanor was sudden and striking. His posture straightened, shoulders squaring with military precision, the trembling hands steadied, becoming weapons themselves. Even his face seemed to transform, the mask of the ordinary pawnbroker falling away to reveal the hardened operative beneath. Razor's eyes widened as he recognized the shift, but it was already too late. Mason's hand shot up, grabbing the wrist, holding the knife while simultaneously driving an elbow into Razor's solar plexus. The blade clattered to the floor as Razor stumbled backward, gasping for air. "Contact!" Sarah shouted, reaching for her weapon, but Mason was already moving. He kicked the knife away while dropping into a defensive stance, his movements fluid and practiced. The Thompson twins drew their weapons, but Mason had positioned himself so Razor's bulk was between them and their target. Ghost moved from his position, drawing his K-bar knife, but Mason had anticipated this. He grabbed a nearby display case and sent it crashing to the floor, creating a barrier of broken glass and scattered merchandise. The crash coincided with the passing train's whistle, momentarily masking the sound of Mason drawing his Sig Sauer. "Nobody move," Mason commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "The next person who reaches for a weapon gets to experience what proper combat training looks like." The Sig Sauer in his hand looked like it belonged there, an extension of his arm rather than a tool. Cypher backed away from the security panel, hands raised. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking at his device's screen. "The entire system just locked down. This is military-grade encryption." "Who the hell are you?" Mason's smile was cold and professional. "Someone you really shouldn't have underestimated." His eyes scanned the room, tracking each potential threat. "Now we're going to have a conversation about choices and consequences. Who wants to go first?" The Steel Serpents exchanged uncertain glances, their carefully planned operation unraveling around them. Sarah's hand had frozen halfway to her weapon, recognizing the look in Mason's eyes, the same look she'd seen in hardened combat veterans. The Thompson twins maintained their positions but hadn't drawn their weapons, their military training telling them they were at a severe tactical disadvantage. Razor struggled to regain his breath, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he wheezed, trying to sound threatening despite his compromised position. Mason's response was calm and measured. "Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" The morning sun streaming through the windows cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the transition from unassuming shopkeeper to dangerous operative. "Before you make your next move," Mason's voice cut through the tension like a razor, "let me share some observations." His Sig Sauer remained perfectly steady, years of training evident in his stance. Sarah Chen, formerly Lieutenant Chen, Navy Special Operations. Discharged after an operation in Yemen went sideways. Not your fault, was it? Bad intel cost you your team. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her hand dropping away from her concealed weapon. The color drained from her face as Mason continued. "The Thompson twins, Jack and Jake, Army EOD, served with distinction until that incident in Kandahar. The official report blamed equipment failure, but we both know that's not the whole story, don't we?" Thunder One's jaw clenched, while his brother took an involuntary step back. Mason's intelligence was too specific, too precise to be guesswork. "Ghost, Martinez, your Force Recon unit was top tier until that classified operation in Syria. Funny how certain details never made it into the official record." Ghost's hand tightened on his knife handle, but he remained frozen in place as Mason spoke. "And Cypher, Charlie Wilson, Air Force Cyber Command, brilliant programmer until you started selling secrets. Would have gotten away with it too, if you hadn't gotten greedy." "How?" Cypher started, but Mason cut him off with a slight gesture of his weapon. "And you, Razor," Mason's voice carried a hint of professional disdain. "Michael Kendrick, Rangers, your unit had a stellar record until that night in Afghanistan, when you decided to take matters into your own hands. The mission parameters were clear: observe and report. Instead, you engaged, and civilians died." Razor's face contorted with rage and recognition. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's read all your files. The classified ones, the ones that never made it to official records." Mason's glasses caught the light, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "I know about the operations that went wrong, the decisions that ended, your careers and the paths that led you here." The revelation hung in the air like smoke, heavy and acrid. The Steel Serpents exchanged glances, their confidence shattered by the realization that they were dealing with someone who knew far too much about their past. "For the past 3 years," Mason continued, his voice maintaining its professional calm, "you've been hitting small businesses across 3 states. Careful planning, military precision, no casualties. Almost admirable, if it weren't for the lives you've ruined. But today..." He adjusted his stance slightly, maintaining clear lines of fire. "Today you made a serious tactical error." Sarah was the first to truly understand. Her special ops training kicked in as she assessed Mason with new eyes. "CIA," she breathed, the word barely audible. "Special Activities Division." Mason's slight smile confirmed her deduction. "Very good, Lieutenant Chen, though I prefer retired." "A pawnbroker these days." The Thompson twins exchanged looks of dawning comprehension. Their military training had taught them to recognize when they were severely outmatched. Ghost's posture had shifted from aggressive to defensive, while Cypher looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Here's what happens next," Mason announced, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "You're going to slowly, very slowly, place your weapons on the floor. Then we're going to have a discussion about your future options. And believe me, your options are severely limited at this point." Razor, still struggling with the reality of the situation, made one last attempt at bravado. "There's 6 of us and 1 of you, old man. Even with your background, those odds..." "Those odds?" Mason interrupted, his voice taking on an edge of Steel. Let me explain something about odds. Right now, my finger is on a dead man's switch. If I release it, every piece of intelligence I have on your operations, past and present, gets transmitted to certain interested parties. Former colleagues who would be very interested in cleaning up some old loose ends. The color drained from Razor's face as the implications sank in. Mason wasn't just threatening them with arrest. He was threatening them with their past, with all the buried secrets and classified operations that could destroy more than just their freedom. "You're bluffing," Cypher said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mason's response was to recite a string of numbers, coordinates, dates, and operation, codes that made Cypher's face go pale. "Would you like me to continue? Perhaps we should discuss that server in Dubai, or maybe the accounts in the Cayman Islands." The fight seemed to drain out of the Steel Serpents as they realized just how thoroughly they'd been compromised. One by one, they began to lower their weapons to the floor, moving with the careful precision of those who knew they were being watched by someone who wouldn't hesitate to act. "Smart choice," Mason commented, his weapon never wavering. "Now about those options I mentioned. You have two paths forward from here. The first involves a lot of uncomfortable questions from people who specialize in asking them. The second—" He paused, letting the tension build. "The second gives you a chance to put your skills to better use." The atmosphere in the pawnshop shifted as Mason's words sank in. The morning sun streaming through the dusty windows cast long shadows across the floor, highlighting the scattered weapons and the tense faces of the Steel Serpents. Sarah was the first to break the heavy silence, her tactical mind already processing the implications of Mason's offer. "Better use?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of skepticism and desperate hope. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Her eyes never left Mason's face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation. She'd been on enough operations to recognize when someone was offering a legitimate way out versus setting up a trap. Mason maintained his professional stance, the Sig Sauer unwavering in his grip, but his voice took on a different tone, less threatening, more analytical. "Your team has impressive capabilities. Military training, specialized skills, exceptional coordination. You've been wasting that potential on small-town heists when you could be doing something far more significant." The Thompson twins exchanged glances, their synchronized movements betraying their interest despite their attempt to maintain neutral expressions. Ghost shifted his weight slightly, his force recon training evident in how he continued to assess the situation even while appearing to stand down. "There are organizations, legitimate ones, always looking for people with your particular skill sets," Mason continued, his glasses catching the light. "Private security firms, specialized. Courier services, consultation agencies, places where your military background would be an asset rather than a liability." Razor's scarred face twisted with skepticism. "And you just happen to know these organizations, going to tell us you can make all our problems disappear?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, but there was an undertone of desperate hope that he couldn't quite conceal. Mason's slight smile carried decades of operational experience. "I know people who know people. More importantly, I know how to make the right introductions. Your records might be problematic, but they're not insurmountable, not with the right assistance." Cypher, still processing the revelation of Mason's true identity, spoke up. "Why would you help us? We just tried to rob you." His fingers twitched toward his dropped device, but a slight shift in Mason's stance made him freeze. "Because I've seen too many good operators go bad after leaving service," Mason replied, his voice carrying a weight of experience. "The transition to civilian life isn't easy. Some of us find a way to adapt." He gestured slightly to the pawnshop. Around them, others need a different path, a purpose that matches their training. Sarah's tactical mind was already running through scenarios. "These organizations you mentioned, they're legitimate. No black ops, no illegal operations." Her experience had taught her to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. Completely legitimate, Mason confirmed, though some operate in grey areas: international security, asset protection, threat assessment. The kind of work that requires people with your background but needs to stay off the radar. He paused, letting his words sink in. Work that pays significantly better than knocking over small-town businesses. Ghost finally spoke, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone used to evaluating tactical situations. What's the catch? There's always a catch. His hand had moved away from his dropped weapon, but his stance remained ready for action. Mason's response was immediate and direct. The catch is that you get one chance, one opportunity to turn things around. If you take it, I'll make the introductions, help smooth over some of the rough spots in your records. If you don't, he let the alternative hang in the air, unspoken, but clear. The Thompson twins stepped forward slightly, moving in their characteristic synchronization. What about our records? The warrants? Thunder 1 asked, while Thunder 2 added, We've got some heat on us from that job in Nevada. That can be handled, Mason assured them. I still have contacts who can help with that kind of problem, but it's a one-time offer. Try to go back to your old ways, and those same contacts will become your worst nightmare. Razor, still struggling with the shift in power dynamics, made one last attempt to assert control. And we're just supposed to trust you? A spook playing? Pawnbroker in some backwater town? His words carried bravado, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Mason's response was calm, but carried an edge of steel. Trust isn't required. Common sense is. You're skilled operators who've lost their way. I'm offering you a chance to get back on track. Take it or don't, but understand that leaving this shop without accepting my offer will have consequences. Sarah stepped forward, her movement deliberate and non-threatening. These organizations, they're the kind that don't ask too many questions about the past. Her voice carried a hint of hope, the first real emotion she'd shown since the confrontation began. They care more about capability than history, Mason confirmed. Prove your worth, and the past becomes less important. But it's a two-way street. They'll expect absolute loyalty and professionalism. No cowboy operations, no personal vendettas. The tension in the room began to shift as the Steel Serpents processed their options. The morning sun had climbed higher, its light now falling directly on the scattered weapons on the floor. The distant sound of town life continued outside, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening within the pawnshop's walls. How would this work? Cypher asked, his analytical mind already processing the possibilities. Practically speaking, what's the first step? His earlier fear had been replaced by cautious interest, the programmer in him seeking to understand the parameters of their potential new reality. Mason kept his weapon ready, but adjusted his stance slightly. First, you walk out of here calmly, like regular customers. Then you wait. Within 48 hours, you'll each receive a contact. Follow their instructions exactly. They'll evaluate your skills, assess your potential, and make appropriate placements. The Steel Serpents exchanged looks, years of working together, allowing them to communicate without words. The opportunity Mason offered represented more than just a way out of their current situation. It was a chance to reclaim the purpose and direction they'd lost after leaving military service. Sarah was the first to make a decision. With deliberate movements, she kicked her dropped weapon further away and straightened to attention. "I'm in," she declared, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd found a new mission. One by one, the others followed suit, even Razor, though his acceptance came with a grudging nod rather than words. Mason's expression remained professional, but there was a hint of approval in his eyes. "Smart choice," he said, finally lowering his weapon slightly. "Remember, one chance, don't waste it." His voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who'd seen both redemption and failure in his line of work. The morning sun had fully illuminated the shop now, casting away the shadows that had cloaked their confrontation. Outside, the Sound of daily life in Silver Creek continued, unaware that within the walls of Mason's pawnshop, 6 lives had just changed course. The transition from criminals to operators had begun, guided by a former CIA operative who understood better than most the fine line between lost causes and second chances. The transformation of the Steel Serpents from predators to potential allies unfolded with the precision of a well-planned operation. Mason directed them to exit the shop in pairs, maintaining the appearance of normal customers, while he outlined the specific protocols they would need to follow in the coming days. Sarah and Cypher left first, their earlier aggression replaced by a professional demeanor that spoke of their military training. "Remember," Mason instructed as they reached the door, 48 hours. When the contact comes, you'll know it's legitimate because they'll reference Silver Creek acquisitions. No other verification will be provided, and none should be requested." His voice carried the authority of someone used to giving mission-critical briefings. The Thompson twins followed 5 minutes later, their synchronized movements now controlled and purposeful rather than threatening. Ghost maintained his position near the back, his force recon training evident in how he continued to monitor potential threats, even as the situation de-escalated. Razor was the last to leave, his massive frame lingering in the doorway. "This better not be a setup, old man," Razor growled, though his threat lacked its earlier conviction. The events of the morning had shaken his confidence, forcing him to re-evaluate everything he thought he knew about their intended target. Mason's response was measured, his posture relaxed but alert. The setup was walking into my shop thinking, "I was an easy mark. What happens next is entirely up to you." His glasses caught the late morning sun, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "Make the right choice, Kendrick. You're better than small-town heists." As the last of the Steel Serpents departed, Mason began the methodical process of securing his shop. His movements were precise and efficient, years of operational experience evident in how he swept the area for any left-behind equipment or surveillance devices. The simple act of straightening merchandise and cleaning up scattered debris became an extension of his training, thorough, systematic, leaving nothing to chance. The security system required special attention. Cypher's attempted breach had triggered several of Mason's custom modifications, and resetting them would take time. His fingers moved across the keypad with practiced ease, entering complex sequences that would have seemed out of place in a small-town pawnshop security setup. The morning's events had necessitated certain protocols be activated. Mason reached beneath the counter, retrieving a secured satellite phone that hadn't seen use in months. The device connected directly to a private network, bypassing conventional telecommunications infrastructure. His message was brief, encoded in a cipher that would mean nothing to anyone outside a very select group of former colleagues. "Silver Creek situation contained, package secure, initiating protocol Echo 7. The transmission lasted less than 3 seconds, but it would set in motion a series of carefully orchestrated events. Within hours, detailed dossiers on the Steel Serpents would be reviewed by individuals who specialized in evaluating potential assets. Mason's attention turned to the safe that had sparked the morning's confrontation. Behind its heavy door lay not just valuable merchandise, but a carefully maintained collection of intelligence-gathering equipment. The pawnshop's role as a cover for ongoing intelligence operations remained intact, though the morning's events would necessitate some adjustments to security protocols. The shop's regular customers would return soon, unaware of the drama that had unfolded within these walls. Mason began preparing for their arrival, his movements shifting back into the carefully crafted persona of the unassuming pawnbroker. The transition was seamless, a testament to years spent moving between identities. As easily as others changed clothes, Sarah Chen would be the first to receive contact, Mason knew. Her background and skill set made her particularly valuable to certain private security firms, always on the lookout for operators with her specific training. The Thompson twins would likely be placed with a specialized courier service that handled sensitive materials for government contractors. Their EOD experience would prove invaluable in detecting and preventing potential threats. Ghost's Force Recon background made him ideal for close protection work, while Cypher's cybersecurity skills, not properly directed, could serve legitimate corporate interests rather than criminal enterprises. Even Razor, with his Rangers training and leadership experience, could find a place in the right organization, provided he could control his more volatile tendencies. The morning sun had reached its peak, casting sharp shadows through the shop's windows. Mason paused in his work, allowing himself a moment to reflect on the morning's events. The confrontation had forced him to reveal more of his past than he'd intended, but the potential benefits outweighed the risks. Converting potential threats into assets was a strategy he'd employed successfully throughout his career. The sound of the shop's bell signaled the arrival of his first regular customer of the day, Mrs. Henderson, right on schedule to check if her late husband's watch had been repaired. Mason smoothly shifted into his role as the helpful pawnbroker, his earlier confrontation with the Steel Serpents already filed away in the compartmentalized sections of his mind where he kept his operational experiences. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," he greeted warmly, his voice carrying no trace of the authority he'd displayed earlier. "I've got good news about your husband's watch." The transition was perfect, the dangerous operative completely hidden behind the facade of small-town shopkeeper. As he worked through the day, Mason maintained his careful observation of the street outside. The Steel Serpents' motorcycles had long since disappeared, their rumble fading into the distance like a receding storm. But he knew this wasn't the end, merely a transformation of one type of operation into another. The next 48 hours would be crucial. His contacts would move quickly to evaluate and place the former gang members before they could reconsider their decisions or fall back into old patterns. The organizations that would receive them specialized in rehabilitating operators who'd lost their way, providing structure and purpose to those who struggled to find their place in civilian life. Mason's role as a facilitator in this transformation was something he'd done before, though never quite so dramatically. His position in Silver Creek, while primarily a cover for other operations, allowed him to serve as a connection point between the worlds of shadow operations and legitimate enterprise. It was a role that suited his skills and experience, allowing him to maintain his network while providing a valuable service to both his former employers and those seeking redemption. The day continued, a steady stream of normal pawnshop business masking the significance of the morning's events. Mason played his role perfectly, maintaining his cover while simultaneously monitoring various channels for confirmation that his message had been received and acted upon. By sunset, the pieces would be in motion, setting the Steel Serpents on a new path that would utilize their skills for more constructive purposes. The transformation of the Steel Serpents sent ripples through certain circles in the weeks that followed. Mason maintained his careful watch over Silver Creek from behind the pawnshop counter, noting the subtle changes that indicated his intervention had taken root. The gang's absence was felt first in the small ways. Fewer suspicious characters passing through town, a decrease in regional chatter about professional heists, a general easing of tension among local business owners. Sarah Chen was the first to successfully transition. Within a month, she had secured a position with an international security firm specializing in high-risk corporate protection. Her background in naval special operations, combined with her linguistic skills, made her particularly valuable for operations in Southeast Asia. Mason received confirmation of her placement through carefully encrypted channels. A simple message that read, "Package 1 delivered successfully." The Thompson twins found their niche in a specialized courier service that handled sensitive materials for defense contractors. Their EOD experience proved invaluable in screening packages and developing new security protocols. Their synchronized efficiency, once used for criminal purposes, now served to protect rather than threaten. Reports filtered back through Mason's network of their exceptional performance and growing reputation for reliability. Ghost's integration into legitimate operations took a slightly different path. His force recon background and natural talent for staying unnoticed made him ideal for close protection work with high-profile clients. Within 2 months, he had established himself as one of the most sought-after security specialists in the private sector, his past discretions buried beneath new commendations and recommendations. Cypher's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. His cybersecurity skills, properly channeled, caught the attention of a major tech firm specializing in defense contracts. Instead of breaching security systems, he now designed them, using his intimate knowledge of vulnerabilities to strengthen digital fortifications. His former expertise in criminal hacking became an asset in protecting against the very types of attacks he once perpetrated. Even Razor, despite his initial resistance, found a path forward. His Rangers training and leadership experience translated well to managing security operations for a private military contractor. The discipline and structure he'd lost after his discharge returned, tempered now by the wisdom of hard lessons learned. His scarred face became a symbol of authority rather than intimidation. Mason observed these changes from his position in Silver Creek, maintaining his cover as the unassuming pawnbroker while continuing his role as a hidden cornerstone in the intelligence community. The shop remained his center of operations, though its nature as a hub for information gathering and asset management had evolved to accommodate the new dynamics created by the Steel Serpents reformation. The true impact of that morning's confrontation extended beyond the immediate participants. Word spread through certain channels that Mason's pawnshop in Silver Creek was more than it appeared, not as a threat, but as a potential lifeline for operators who had lost their way. The message was subtle, passed through whispered conversations and encrypted communications. There was a path back for those who wanted it. 6 months after the confrontation, Mason received an unexpected visit. Sarah Chen walked into the shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, her presence markedly different from her first appearance. Gone was the aggressive biker persona, replaced by the confident bearing of a professional security operative. She wore a tailored business suit, her previous leather-cut attitude replaced by polished competence. "I never properly thanked you," she said, placing a small package on the counter, "for giving us a second chance." The package contained a rare Vietnamese war medal, a legitimate acquisition this time, obtained through proper channels. "Thought this might fit your collection." Mason examined the medal with professional interest, noting its authenticity and historical significance. "You've done well for yourself," he observed, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had that morning, 6 months ago. "The others?" Sarah's report was concise and professional. The Thompson twins had just completed their first year with 0 security incidents. Ghost had successfully protected 3 high-profile clients through potentially volatile situations. Cypher had already patented 2 new security protocols. Even Razor had found his footing, his team maintaining an impressive operational record. "We were wasting our potential," Sarah acknowledged, her eyes scanning the shop with new appreciation. "Running small-time heists when we could have been—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Making a difference, I suppose." Mason's response was measured, his shopkeeper's persona temporarily setting aside to address her as one professional to another. "The hardest part of our line of work isn't the operations," he said, carefully storing the medal in a secure display case. "It's finding purpose when the official missions end. Some of us adapt." He gestured to the shop around them. "Others need a different path." Their conversation was interrupted by the shop's bell as a regular customer entered. Mason smoothly transitioned back into his pawnbroker role, while Sarah made a show of examining some displayed jewelry. The interaction was brief but meaningful, a reminder that second chances, properly handled, could lead to extraordinary transformations. As Sarah departed, Mason returned to his daily routine, but with a subtle satisfaction in how events had unfolded. The Steel Serpents' transformation from threats to assets represented more than just a successful operation. It was a testament to the possibility of redemption, of finding new purpose after losing one's way. The pawnshop continued its dual role in Silver Creek, serving both as a legitimate business and as a hidden nexus for certain specialized operations. Mason maintained his careful balance of identities, the unassuming pawnbroker and the skilled operative working in concert to maintain a delicate network of information and influence. The morning's confrontation that had sparked these changes became part of the shop's hidden history, one of many stories embedded in its walls. To the casual observer, Mason's pawnshop remained just another small-town business, but to those who knew where to look, it stood as a symbol of transformation and second chances, a place where lost operators could find their way back to purpose and redemption. As the seasons changed in Silver Creek, Mason's pawnshop remained a constant fixture in the community's landscape, its weathered brick exterior and gold-lettered windows concealing the extraordinary events that had unfolded within its walls. The story of the Steel Serpents' transformation became whispered legend in certain circles, a tale of redemption that sparked hope in others who had lost their way after leaving service. The ripple effects of that confrontation continued to spread. Through the shadows of the intelligence community, Mason's role as a facilitator of second chances added another layer to his already complex network of operations. The pawnshop's reputation grew among a very select group, former operators, intelligence officers, and military personnel who had strayed from their path but sought a way back. 1 year after the Steel Serpents' transformation, Mason received a series of encrypted messages that confirmed the full scope of their rehabilitation. Sarah Chen had been promoted to Regional Security Director for her firm's Asia-Pacific operations, her tactical expertise and leadership skills earning recognition. From former skeptics, the Thompson twins had expanded their courier service to include training other operators in specialized transport protocols, their military experience finding new purpose in education and mentorship. Ghost had established his own consulting firm, providing threat assessment and security planning for high-profile clients. His force recon background, combined with the discipline learned through his second chance, made him particularly effective at identifying and neutralizing potential threats before they materialized. Cypher's work in cybersecurity had led to breakthrough developments in encryption technology, his former skills now dedicated to protecting rather than exploiting vulnerabilities. Razor's transformation had perhaps been the most profound. The former gang leader had found his true calling in rehabilitation programs for veterans, using his own experience to help others navigate the difficult transition from military to civilian life. His scarred face became a symbol of hope rather than intimidation, a visible reminder that past mistakes didn't have to define one's future. Mason observed these developments with professional satisfaction, maintaining his careful balance of identities while continuing his work in Silver Creek. The pawnshop evolved as well, its inventory gradually including more specialized items that served as signals to those in the know. Certain military memorabilia, arranged in specific patterns, conveyed messages to operators who knew how to read them. The town itself remained largely unaware of the shop's deeper significance, though observant residents might have noticed an increase in out-of-town visitors, professional-looking men and women who entered the shop with purpose and left with renewed direction. Mason's cover as the helpful pawnbroker never slipped, his years of training allowing him to maintain multiple layers of identity with seamless efficiency. On a quiet evening, as Mason was preparing to close the shop, he received an unexpected transmission on his secured communications channel. The message was brief but significant. Silver Creek Protocol recognized as standard procedure for asset recovery and rehabilitation. His morning confrontation with the Steel Serpents had evolved into an official, albeit unofficial, program for reclaiming lost operators. The implications were substantial. What had begun as a single incident of turning potential threats into assets had grown into a systematic approach to handling similar cases. Other stations across the country had adopted variations of the Silver Creek Protocol, creating a network of opportunity for operators who had strayed from their path but retained the potential for redemption. Mason's role expanded accordingly. Though always within the carefully maintained constraints of his cover, the pawnshop remained his primary base of operations, its unassuming facade continuing to serve as the perfect blind for his more specialized activities. The lessons learned from the Steel Serpents transformation informed his approach to subsequent cases, each success adding to the protocol's effectiveness. The shop's regular customers noticed subtle changes. New display cases featuring military memorabilia, an expanded selection of specialized equipment disguised as vintage collectibles, and an increasing number of security-related items. To the uninitiated, these changes appeared to be simple business decisions. To those who understood the signs, they represented something far more significant. One morning, almost exactly a year after the confrontation, Mason arrived at his shop to find a package waiting. Inside was a set of custom motorcycle keys and a note that read simply, "The road to redemption starts in Silver Creek." The message was clear. Word had spread, and others were seeking the same opportunity for transformation that the Steel Serpents had found. The pawnshop's role in the intelligence community had evolved beyond its original purpose as a monitoring station. It had become a beacon for those seeking redemption, a place where skills honed in military service could be redirected toward legitimate purposes. Mason's experience in turning the Steel Serpents from threats to assets had created a template for similar transformations. The impact of these changes extended beyond individual operations. The intelligence community's approach to handling former operators who had strayed began to shift, recognizing the value of rehabilitation over elimination. The Silver Creek Protocol became shorthand for a more nuanced approach to asset management, one that considered the potential for redemption alongside the assessment of threats. Mason continued his daily routine, maintaining his cover while facilitating these transformations. Each successful rehabilitation strengthened the network, creating new resources and opportunities for those seeking to return to legitimate operations. The pawnshop remained the heart of this operation, its ordinary appearance masking its extraordinary purpose. As Silver Creek moved through its seasons, the legend of the Steel Serpents transformation became part of the shop's hidden history. Regular customers continued to bring their watches for repair and jewelry for appraisal, unaware that they were participating in a much larger operation. Mason's role as the unassuming pawnbroker remained intact, his true impact known only to those who had found their way back through his intervention. The morning's confrontation with the Steel Serpents had done more than prevent a robbery. It had created a model for redemption that continued to ripple through the intelligence community. The pawnshop stood as a testament to the possibility of transformation. its weathered brick walls containing countless stories of operators who had lost their way and found it again within its confines. The legacy of Mason's pawnshop and the Steel Serpents transformation continued to influence the intelligence community in subtle but significant ways. The Silver Creek Protocol became a model for rehabilitation programs across various agencies, though its origins remain known only to a select few. Mason's role as the architect of this transformation was protected by layers of secrecy and misdirection, his identity as the unassuming pawnbroker serving as the perfect cover for his ongoing operations. 2 years after the confrontation, Mason received word that his approach had been formally adopted by several private security firms specializing in veteran rehabilitation. The success rate of the program spoke for itself. Over 30 former operators successfully reintegrated into legitimate operations, their skills redirected toward protecting rather than threatening society. The pawnshop itself evolved to meet the growing demands of its dual purpose. New security systems were installed under the guise of routine upgrades, while the inventory expanded to include more specialized items that served as markers for those in the know. The balance between maintaining cover and facilitating operations became an art form, one that Mason had mastered through decades of experience. Sarah Chen's success story became particularly noteworthy. Her security firm had expanded its operations to include a specialized division focused on rehabilitating former military personnel, using her own experience as a template for transformation. The program, officially listed as Professional Reintegration Services, carried echoes of the morning that had changed her life in Silver Creek. The Thompson twins developed a training program that combined their EOD experience with their courier service expertise, creating a unique curriculum for handling sensitive materials. Their methodology, born from their own journey from threats to assets, became standard procedure for several high-security transport operations. Ghost's consulting firm grew to include a network of reformed operators, each bringing their specialized skills to legitimate security operations. The firm's reputation for excellence was matched only by its discretion, with many clients unaware of the extraordinary backgrounds of their security consultants. Cypher's contributions to cybersecurity continued to evolve, his intimate knowledge of both sides of digital warfare making him particularly effective at developing protective measures. His patents, now numbering in the dozens, helped reshape the landscape of digital security while providing opportunities for other reformed hackers to apply their skills legitimately. Razor's rehabilitation program for veterans expanded to multiple locations, each facility incorporating elements of the Silver Creek Protocol into its approach. His personal journey from gang leader to mentor inspired others to seek their own path to redemption, creating a ripple effect that touched countless lives. Mason watched these developments from his position in Silver Creek, maintaining his careful balance of identities while continuing to serve as a pivot point for transformation. The pawnshop remained his center of operations, its unassuming facade concealing its role in a growing network of rehabilitation and redemption. The morning confrontation that had sparked these changes became part of intelligence community folklore, a reminder that sometimes the most effective solution to a problem was not elimination but transformation. The Steel Serpents story, carefully anonymized and stripped of identifying details, became a case study in asset recovery and rehabilitation. Silver Creek itself remained largely unchanged, its residents unaware of the significance of the pawnshop in their midst. To them, Mason was simply the helpful shopkeeper who could fix watches and offer fair prices for family heirlooms. His cover, maintained through years of practice and discipline, never wavered. The legacy of that morning continued to grow, its influence spreading through carefully maintained networks of former operators and intelligence personnel. The Silver Creek Protocol became synonymous with second chances, a path back for those who had strayed but retained the potential for redemption. As Mason closed his shop each evening, he took satisfaction in knowing that the confrontation with the Steel Serpents had created something larger than himself, a system for transformation that would continue long after he retired from active operations. The pawnshop stood as a testament to the possibility of change, its weathered walls containing countless stories of redemption and renewal. Subscribe to be notified when our next epic story drops, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the years that followed, Mason's pawnshop remained a beacon of transformation in Silver Creek, the legacy of that fateful morning when 6 bikers made the mistake of targeting an ex-CIA operative continued to ripple through the intelligence community. The Silver Creek Protocol became more than just a program. It became a symbol of hope for those seeking redemption. Thomas Mason continued his double life, maintaining his cover as the unassuming pawnbroker while quietly guiding others toward a better path. The Steel Serpents' success story inspired countless others, proving that sometimes the most dangerous predators could become the most effective protectors when given the right opportunity. The shop's bell still chimes every morning as Mason opens. For business, its cheerful ring carrying an extra meaning for those who know its true significance. Behind the weathered brick walls and gold-lettered windows, second chances continue to be offered to those who prove worthy of them. To the residents of Silver Creek, it remains just another pawn shop on Main Street. But to a select few, it represents something far more significant, a place where lost operators can find their way back to purpose and redemption, guided by a former CIA operative who understands the fine line between past mistakes and future potential. As Mason likes to say, to those who find their way to his counter seeking a second chance. Sometimes the most valuable things we reclaim aren't the items in these cases. They're the lives we choose to live from this moment forward. If you enjoyed this incredible story of redemption and second chances, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales of unexpected heroes walking among us. Every week, we bring you amazing real-life stories that remind us appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight. Have you ever encountered someone who turned out to be more than they appeared? Share your experiences in the comments below. What kind of story would you like to hear next? Don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated on our next videos, featuring more incredible tales of hidden heroes, unexpected twists, and inspirational transformations. See you in our next video, where we'll explore another amazing story that proves truth is often stranger than fiction.